Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to Changeworks webinar on double glazing in historic buildings, looking at planning and the customer journey to installing double glazing in listed buildings in Scotland. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. My name is Alex Hilliam. I've been leading on this bit of research for Changeworks. For those of you that don't know, and I think most of you probably will, Changeworks are a charity and social enterprise based in Edinburgh, focusing on delivering and inspiring and enable people to reduce their carbon emissions, focusing on energy and waste issues. This morning, hopefully we're going to have an interesting discussion, interesting webinar with both people in the room here and those of you online. We're very much looking forward to you getting some feedback from yourselves online as well as those people in the room here. And before we get going, I just want to introduce everybody in here. I've got three interested participants in the webinar here, just hopefully get some views from so you hear someone other than myself for the next hour. So I'm going to pass you around to my colleagues in here just to introduce themselves before we kick off the webinar. So.
My name's Jim Robertson and I work for Home Energy Scotland as a Green Deal Specialist within the Strathclyde Central Office of Home Energy Scotland.
Thanks very much, Jim.
Hi, my name is Gary McEwen. I work for North Lanarkshire Council. I work within the conservation section within North Lanarkshire Council.
Hi, I'm Steve McClure. I work for Falkirk Council and I'm a Development Management Officer, so I deal with planning applications and inquiries from customers as well.
Great, thank you very much all. Interesting small panel here, and I know there's other people of you participating online that will have complementary perspectives on the topics today. So again, please do take part and add your comments via the chat function. And I'll go through that again in a little bit of time. Okay, so I'll give you an overview of what we're going to discuss today. We've been doing a study over the last couple of months exploring the installation of slim profile double glazing in listed buildings in Scotland. It's a relatively new technology, but we've done some work on it. I've been doing work on it on and off for a number of years, trying to explore how successfully it can be installed and the challenges to getting it installed in Scotland. And we've done some follow-up work on that today. So I'll talk a little bit about that today in a moment, just what we've done. But obviously we'll be discussing our findings. What we found out about the process of owners installing double glazing in listed buildings. So, the background to this study, what's it all about? Well, this study is all about slimline double glazing and why, and getting it fitted to listed buildings. So why do we need it? Well, 75% of Scottish housing was built before 1982 and 20% of it was built before 1919, and all of those will, the majority of those will still have single glazed windows. Single glazing has particularly poor energy efficiency, roughly twice the heat loss of a double glazed window. And what that results in is obviously higher CO2 emissions from heating, increasing your fuel costs, increased condensation on windows, which can obviously act to damage any wooden windows or indeed metal windows within which that glazing is contained. So that's great. So obviously double glazing is a particularly good option to prevent lots of those things, but standard double glazing is not always an option for a listed building because of the heritage aspects of the building. Sticking a UPVC window in a traditional building may be challenging for many reasons. So the options the previous options for owners of historic or listed buildings was draft proofing of windows, using shutters, maybe installing secondary glazing, all of which are effective at energy reduction, but not to the extent of double glazing. So a number of years ago, slim profile double glazing was developed and introduced as a solution for these sorts of properties. It's, as you can see from the picture there, it's a double glazing unit that's much thinner than a standard double glazed window, and it can be fitted in to existing wooden heritage frames. So it's just a case of removing the existing glass, replacing it with this slimline unit, and there was usually a little bit of extra work around rebalancing the windows because the panes are slightly heavier. So that technology is there, it's usable and it's applicable for heritage windows. So why are we doing this workshop? Well, way back in 2010, Changeworks were, along with Lister Housing and Edinburgh World Heritage, were asked by the City of Edinburgh Council to look at this issue, to try and understand if double glazing could be used appropriately in listed buildings. Did it work effectively? Did it have decent thermal performance? Was it detrimental to the appearance of the buildings? So we installed and tested a range of slimline units from a range of different manufacturers in a series of listed buildings. Whilst doing that, we had householder engagement. In the process of doing that, we engaged the householders to see how the change affected them, and we also did some thermal performance testing. What it showed was that there were significant improvement in insulation and comfort from installing these things, and obviously a reduction in condensation occurred as well. And probably the most powerful and important thing of this was that actually there wasn't really significant visual change in the properties that had it installed. And that was fantastic from an energy efficiency point of view, and that's obviously what our organisation is all about, because it actually facilitated a planning policy change in the City of Edinburgh Council to allow slim profile double glazing to be fitted, in some cases, to listed properties. And that's fantastic, and that's a real outcome. That was something that us as an organisation were very pleased about, and hopefully it had a big impact. Well, obviously it had an impact because it changed planning policy, but we were hoping it was going to have a big impact on the owners of listed properties in Edinburgh. So that was a while ago. Planning policy changed a while ago, so we had these additional outcomes in addition to getting the planning policy change there. We were reflecting on this and thinking, well, actually, was this an issue in other local authority areas in Scotland? Was it allowed? Had planning policy changed in line with this change, or was there no policy change required in other local authority areas? We wanted to explore this. We also wanted to explore if this planning policy change had meant that it was actually a little bit easier for householders or owners within Edinburgh to install glazing upgrades to their listed properties, and to see if it had improved the installations and try to understand that journey. So what we did, we secured some money from the Scottish Government's Learning Network Challenge Fund to, along with our own investment, to explore this issue further. So the key questions that we wanted to find out were, what is the situation in other local authorities? How is this policy working out in Edinburgh? Is it working well from the perspective of planners, installers, homeowners? What are the challenges and the issues? And if there are any challenges and issues, what can be done to help people get slimline double glazing installed in listed properties where it is appropriate? So what did we do? We reviewed the listed and the conservation area policies on the local authority websites in Scotland, and we went to all 32 of them. We had a look around, we did some searching. It was sometimes challenging, it wasn't always straightforward, but we went and looked at all of them. And we also, to follow that up, had direct contact with 15 local authority planning departments. We also then, to explore, so that was just to get a flavour of what was happening across Scotland. We then had a workshop in Edinburgh to explore the customer journey for those installing slimline double glazing. And we've been doing a blog on our own website just to share the information and feedback as we've gone on, and there will be another blog on the Changeworks website following this seminar. So, and finally, here we are, a webinar. Thank you very much for joining us on the webinar, and this is so the aim of this webinar really is to share what we've learned so far, and to gather insights from those that weren't able to make the initial projects, the initial workshop in Edinburgh. So I've got some questions for everybody here, the people in the room here, and also those of you out there in the internet, just to think about as we go through this process. Firstly, in terms of your experience and your knowledge of people getting double glazing installed in listed buildings, potentially in conservation areas, where do owners find out about this stuff? Where do they source their information from? And for those of you that are planners that are viewing, and I know there are a few, what kind of information are the clients seeking? Okay. What are the barriers and challenges for those wanting to install or repair glazing in historic buildings? are the key issues different for different stakeholders? Are there particular issues for particular people out there that are trying to deal with this issue? Are there particular problems for planners, owners, installers? Please do let us know what your comments are. I know there's a few comments coming in now. And what would you change about this process? Would you keep it the same? Do you think it's working well as it is? Are there any things that you should change in terms of getting this process moving forward? So please share your thoughts via the questions function. I think it's the question function that's working. That's what you're all using. Feed them in, and comments I'll pick up on some of the comments as we go through the webinar. Okay, right, back to our findings. So as I said, we reviewed planning policies across Scotland. We had a look at all the websites, and what we found was actually really quite positive from our point of view, in that double glazing appears to be allowed in listed buildings in all areas that we directly contacted. So to some extent, we started out with this project thinking that there may be other local authorities that were in a similar situation to the City of Edinburgh before we did our research, in that it may be explicitly prohibited, but it didn't appear to be so. However, listing building consent was obviously required to do this kind of intervention. It's only allowed under certain circumstances, all subject to case-by-case scrutiny, so each individual application had to be assessed by itself. And what was very clear was that the maintenance of the heritage elements of the property and of the appearance of the property were clearly important as a general rule in this in the guidance that we found. So overall visual merit is primary consideration, and in many cases repair and refurbish were favoured over a replacement. And I don't know if the two planners that we have here want to make a comment about that, whether we've got the right impression on that. Does that reflect the experience in your authorities?
Yeah, we would always ensure that it would be repair and maintenance first. We'd only want a replacement window if it couldn't be salvaged, and in most cases we find that given a lot of the older windows, the wood's a lot better quality, that they can easily, maybe sections that are rotten or coming away, can just be replaced and inserted in rather than the full window actually having to come out and be replaced. So yeah, it's certainly something that we would favour over a full replacement of the window.
Great. So
yeah, I would agree with that as well. That's what I would suggest as well. I'd always look for the repair and refurbish first, and the replacement of parts, sections of the window, etc. can be done.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, moving into a bit more detail, we did look in, obviously that's a kind of overview of the policy, but in a bit more detail, we looked at them as if, we were property owners. You know, we were researchers, but we looked at them as if they were property owners. And it was a little bit unclear. The rules were a little bit opaque in some cases. So for 23 of the 32 local authority websites that we look at, we couldn't find, doesn't mean to say it wasn't there, we couldn't find any explicit guidance in relation to slimline double glazings in listed buildings and conservation areas. So we followed that up. And those phone calls that we made resulted in no local authority explicitly prohibiting the technology in any listed building. So the answer to our initial question was really positive. It can be done across Scotland, but how easy is it? I think it's interesting. We're already getting some comments in on the webinar. We've got a comment identifying that the main barriers are costs and technology and the availability of window type acceptable to planning. We've got another comment talking about whether we go into detail on the ISM tool for our analysis, and I'll talk about that in a minute, so thank you for your comment. But those issues are interesting and coming up. So what our research did at the next step after this review was to try and find out actually how easy it is. What are the barriers? So what we did was hold a workshop in Edinburgh to understand that process. We explored the process of installing it, this glazing technology in listed buildings. We invited a range of people, some of which I know are online now, so thank you very much for coming back to us. That included planners, installers, property owners, conservation organisations, and representatives of energy advice agencies. So we've got a really good mix there of people who had some perspective on this process and would have different influences on this and different experiences. And we focused on the customer journey. So we didn't, we obviously talked about the technologies and so on, but we very much focused on what an owner, be that an individual owner or indeed owner of a large group of properties such as a housing association, we have representatives of housing associations there, we focused on what their journey was to installing this technology in their listed building. And we kind of started off with this as a process. The first step was obviously for the property owner was a consideration of a change or an improvement, be that as a result of repair, a desire to make the property more energy efficient and so on. Then the next stage in our theoretical process was that actually the owners would become aware of their options and the key steps that they needed to go through. Because we're talking about listed properties here, there should be some contact with planning. Then it's a case of getting approval and consent and obtaining quotes and actually getting your install done. Now that all seems very straightforward. We asked our members of the workshop what they felt about that, whether that actually accurately represented what was going on. And there was very quickly a focus on that second stage in terms of actually are owners aware of the options available to them, and do they know the process that they're going to go through. And we spent a lot of time talking about that and unpicking where information would come from and so on and so forth. And I don't know if that if anyone in the room's got perspectives on that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for us, particularly at Home Energy Scotland. A lot of homeowners or housing associations may have become aware of funding that might be available or options to be able to fund getting the measure installed. And what they would do is come to us in terms of saying, can I access this funding? Is it available? Would I be able to do that to my property given its listed status, or whether or not it was in a conservation area? Our default position is yes, the funds are available, but what we recommend doing before you go ahead and install is go back and speak to your planning department to find out, what restrictions would be in place, or whether you could actually go ahead. But certainly, yes, there are funds available to enable getting those measures installed.
Okay.
Yeah, I would think from our point of view, a lot of the time I've actually maybe gone to suppliers first or discussed costs and things, and then they come to us sort of secondary. Sometimes they're going down the wrong road initially, mainly because they've maybe been pushed on that way by a supplier that they've maybe contacted. So it's a lot of the time they're not aware of what they can do specifically, and as I say, we are as our own department's trying to bring up our guidance and availability of information to the public, both on the line and just to contact with the department as well. And we offer a free pre-application service, which we're also able to go out and meet people as well on site. And it's just trying to make them aware of the options available to them. But I think a lot of people just go with the sort of bigger companies, and at that stage, that's when they can run into problems because maybe they costed well in excess of UPVC windows, for example, and that can kind of push people to in their mind, think that they can't replace these with wooden windows, be it sash and case or another style wooden framed window. And I think that's kind of a barrier that we've got to kind of overcome with people all the time.
Yeah. Okay.
I would 100% agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. So we spent, and these we're now starting to talk about the people that the owners are contacting and the issues about what technology is appropriate and so on and so forth. And these are discussions that we got into in the workshop in Edinburgh. And what I'm going to do now is we analysed all those findings and we tried to unpick the factors that influenced whether or not someone would actually install this property in their listed building. So we did that, we analysed those findings, and what we did with those findings is that we overlaid them on the Scottish Government's new individual social material behaviour change tool. Now, we were using this kind of, I suppose, in a stealth mode when we were undertaking the workshop, because we were considering the elements of this, the factors that this tool described. We weren't actually explicitly talking about it in the workshop. But what this tool tells us is it gives us a way of understanding why people do what they do and the different factors that can influence people's behaviour. And the ISM stands for, as it's there on the screen, individual social material. So what it describes is that there are three main contexts that you need to think about if you want to understand why someone is going to undertake a particular behaviour. In this case, we're thinking about getting their slim profile double glazing installed. So the first context is the material. And that's the context within which all these decisions are being made. And that covers things like the rules and regulations, which in this case are the planning, the technologies or the objects, which are the actual physical windows themselves, and time available and schedules and so on. So that's the physical boundaries that restrict a particular behaviour. And you need to consider that if you want to install slim profile double glazing. Of course, if the rules and regulations don't allow it, you can't do it. But as we found out and we've started to discuss here, there's other things going on other than rules and regulations being there, which is where things like the social context comes in. So the social context thing is what's happening in the social world around this issue. So are people getting advice from planning organisations, for example? Are people getting advice from installers, from organisations like Home Energy Scotland? What does it mean to have slim profile double glazing installed? Is it a positive thing or is it detrimental? All these kind of things are things that are out there in the social world that we need to consider that can help or hinder installation. Finally, there's the individual context, which is very much about factors that are directly related to that individual owner. Do they have the skills, for example, or the knowledge to be able to make that decision effectively? Are they aware of the costs and the benefits of doing it? Costs to themselves financially, costs to the impact on the visual impact of the property? Do they believe it's a good thing to do? Are they able to do those sort of things? So what we do is we find it a really useful way of breaking down the factors that can influence behaviours by using this model. And that's what we've done in terms of the analysis of the workshop. We've looked at material factors, we've looked at social factors that influence this decision, and we've looked at individual factors. And I'm going to go through those now, and I'll ask for feedback from yourselves watching online and also within the room on some of these issues. And we've just picked out the main ones, really. So the material factors, so this is the thing, the material and physical things and regulation things that are out there that influence a decision. So of course the first thing out there is the planning policies. Does the planning policy allow it to happen? Well, our research has suggested that it does in many cases. The rules are there, but they're not always clear. And again, that was echoed in the workshop. It's a case-by-case basis. Planning can't be definitive. But what was interesting from the workshop that because it's a case-by-case basis, there were some comments that there were perceived inconsistencies in how planning is applied from the perspective of the owners or the wider stakeholders out there. Well, hang on, one thing's got through here, but it hasn't got through there. And there are also comments about differences between local authority areas. So I don't know whether there's planners in here who want to comment on that kind of issue about perceived inconsistencies, or?
I think people generally do, because there's such a variety of building type, window type, styles, we really do need the details in of the specifics of what's to be done to that building, because it could be that maybe in one building, for example, the windows could be fully replaced given their state, their style, but in another it's maybe that the window style is the very original, and there's maybe, as we maybe discussed earlier, historic glazing, which again in that case we may not wish double glazing to be put in. So I
think sometimes the people are they're not aware. They're not aware of the subtle differences in cases, and because of that, they see them as inconsistencies. It's not necessarily that we're being inconsistent. It's just that different cases are treated differently because there are subtleties that that the people aren't aware of. So it's kind of perceived inconsistencies.
One of the things that we have is obviously a customer may have spoken to maybe like a larger installer where it might only be UPVC as the option, and they perceive that to have it replaced by maybe something that's like wooden sash and case, it might be prohibitively expensive, or the other thing about not being sure about what the planning rules are, and us saying to them, look, there is funds available, you can get it installed, but before you do anything, have a chat with your planning officer or have a chat with your local authority, because they will give you the best steer in terms of what is available and what you can actually do at your property, and from there you'll be better informed in terms of what you do going forward.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, and I think it's important, and again, that's kind of echoing other findings that we've had. It's important that I think this inconsistency tends to be a perception on behalf of the owners rather than necessarily actually how it's being applied. Okay, we've got a comment coming on here suggesting that agree about the subtle differences. Some larger companies cannot replicate the existing window, whether a joiner could. Okay, so that's interesting. That's, I think, relating to the specifics of actually what's being proposed to be replaced and so on and so forth. Okay. Okay. Another comment here saying policies fly out of the window if an application is called into a committee, suggesting that when applications get escalated, opinions can be changed. Any experience of that from other?
In fairness, that can be something that happens. Obviously, you know, we can only, from my perspective, I offer advice. Development management can make a decision based on all the information that they have available to them. But if that's been determined at committee and they decide that they don't like something or that they do like something, then they can go against the position of the development management section. It happens. It doesn't happen that often, but it probably happens often enough to kind of, we've all been in that position.
Yeah, we've had that experience, to be honest, and we've tried now to I suppose, educate the local members who make up the committees more in terms of the benefits of it. We have, as I say, had difficulty at times with that because, as I said, they're obviously maybe getting nibbled at one end from the local resident or whoever's looking to put the windows in, and again it's maybe just because at the beginning they've gone through an experience where a UPVC window, for example, might be coming in cheaper, but again it might just be because I've not looked across all the options. But yes, I would agree that that is a difficulty because we only make a recommendation in the end, and it is, as I say, it can be overturned.
So it's a challenge, but it's not but I think that's one of the findings that was clear from us, that you can't give a definitive yes or no in any case to start with, but yeah, there has to be case by case expectation. I suppose the only other comment that we had here from the planning policy discussion was that actually there were different experiences in relation to the requirements, or the perceived requirements that had to be done in terms of forms, expectations, whether you needed architect's designs or not, and so on and so forth. So it was an unclear, or maybe not as clear as it could be for someone coming in there first off. Okay, so the second material factor that really stood out there really was the funding that was available for this technology, and it was a particularly, there was a fair bit of discussion on this. There is limited funding for glazing in general compared to other energy efficiency measures, and that's there's lots of work going on and has been over a number of years on things like insulation, both lofts and walls, replacement boilers, etc., etc. So actually the funding for glazing hasn't been significant, and there was a perception that, well, actually, did this impact on the knowledge and the expertise of some of the wider stakeholders in there? If they weren't talking about if Home Energy Scotland, for example, wasn't pushing these kind of measures and these kind of funds, then maybe they weren't talked about as much. And did that have an impact on, I suppose, how much of prioritisation this was in a listed building, for example? If you could insulate your loft in a listed building, do it, but actually there's not a lot of funding for something else to do something else. I don't know what your perspective is on that.
Generally, a lot of the inquiries we tend to get are from people who have got an awareness of the fact of the type of property they live in and are looking to do something about it, particularly in terms of the glazing, and they're looking to tap into funds or access any funds that are available either through Scottish Government, local government, or UK national government with things like the Green Deal for the UK government, or things like the HEAPS cashback scheme, or the cashback scheme as it was, or the new HEAPS loan, which has recently come into place. There are amounts of money to be able to do that. For example, the HEAPS cashback at the moment offers cashback up to £300 for secondary glazing, and also for the HEAPS loan, which is interest free over 10 years, you can access a maximum value of up to £4,500 to replace single glaze units with double or triple glazing. So there are funds available to enable to do it.
Yeah, but it's a bit I suppose the other issue is a big expensive project.
Yes.
And for some of the bigger property owners, housing associations and so on, it's a big investment, and it's essentially hard to get money for that. Okay. other material factors that jumped out is, of course, the technology itself. It's the thing that we're talking about. It's what goes in there. It's relatively novel. Okay, it's been around for a while, but it's not as established as standard double glazing. And I think that led to some interesting discussions, or has impacted on some of the. There was certainly an element of that in the discussions that we had at the workshop, which was that there had been some people had heard concerns expressed about the longevity of slim profile double glazing. Does it last as long? Is it doing what it said it should? But we looked around, and there are, the manufacturers do offer guarantees that are comparable to many standard double glazed units. In standard double glazing, failure isn't uncommon, but potentially, because this is a new and relatively untapped, tried and tested material, there were still some concerns about it, and I think that's there. And I suppose the second, I don't know whether that actually, interesting to hear if you've heard other planners here or have heard anything about any concerns about that. I know you talked about before the webinar about the technology that you're going to be using.
Yeah, I think we are going through a Timescape Heritage initiative at the moment, and so there's a potential for hundreds of windows to be replaced, and that's part of the small grant scheme as well, and as part of larger priority projects within the THI. One of the things that we've struggled with in the last few months is people going to even small suppliers that don't have the technology. For example, that if it's maybe a 6-pane window, a lot of the time they want to replace it with one single pane and just have fake ashtagles, whereas we don't want to see that. Whereas we know the technology is available to replace the smaller units with double glazing, but it's just, again, sometimes it really does depend on the manufacturer they go to, even if it's a smaller manufacturer on that. So it's trying to get people to actually explore around and make sure they do speak to various different window companies. And the problem for us is we are not allowed to obviously advise people on that side of things. They have to do that themselves. We're not allowed to see it as obviously giving out actual company names, etc.
Yeah. Okay.
For us, at Home Energy Scotland, we seem to have less people concerned about the new type of technology in terms of its performance and things like that. People are just keen to get something into their property that's going to be better than the single glazed units that they currently have. So there's not as many concerns about the longevity of the technology necessarily, just more about actually getting it, a process in place where they can actually get it installed, which is actually quite surprising for myself as well. But generally, that in the case, nobody's really come to us with a concern about a particular type of technology. What I generally tend to find is, excuse me, people want to do something rather than do nothing, or people will have one specific technology in mind that they are determined that they want to get installed in their property. And again, it's saying to people, look, you have to look around, you have to speak to the planning department, you have to have a sensitivity around what you can and what you can't, install in your property.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. And in relation to the best technology, that kind of extended is still into the kind of question that I've got there on the bottom of the screen. Is actually, what is the best solution? Actually, what should you be doing to your listed building windows? And there was a bit of debate about what the most appropriate thing was. Actually, should you actually not be doing it? Should you be putting secondary glazing in because that's better? It maintains that historical element. Although there are other perspectives that we've seen where actually saying that secondary glazing doesn't look as nice because you get reflections from further in the room, so it looks like you've got something behind the window. So there's it's a big mix of technologies there. And we've got a comment online coming in saying there's a perception that some companies are better than others, with various organisations being more supported. I'm not going to name organisations on here. And secondary glazing, one comment from a webinar viewer saying that secondary glazing is viewed as the best option, and I think we're going to talk about those kind of issues, actually what's the best thing, a little bit more in the next section when we talk about kind of some of the social factors. But thank you for your comments coming in. So we have a situation with these material factors, the funding, the planning policies and the actual technologies, that actually there's potentially a bit of confusion here because there's very little hard lines drawn in the sand. This is what you should and shouldn't do. There's different perspectives from different organisations. So actually, if there's some ambiguity there, whoever's influencing the owners is going to have a big impact. So who does influence the owners? Who do they go to for advice and answers? What are they thinking about this technology? Where are they getting information about? Whether it's great high-tech modern stuff or whether it's stuff that maybe isn't going to last. Where are they getting these from? And to explore that, we can look at the social context, the social factors that are influencing this decision making. So the institutions, the organisations, the bodies that are influencing and engaging with the owners. Well, the first thing that came out really was that actually there isn't a really, although Homeowners Scotland obviously do offer advice on this, there isn't a really leading independent advisor on glazing, in particular in relation to slim profile double glazing, compared to other energy efficiency measures. Homeowners Scotland have been pushing particular measures where there's been lots of funding for a long time. I'm not sure they're, I don't know, would you say you're as up to speed on glazing as other technologies?
Probably probably not as much as probably other technologies like insulation, things like that, although we are getting there. Traditionally, the people that sort of get in contact with ourselves are looking, they've maybe explored options and are looking as the best way to find out to tap into a fund that's available or get a bit of advice on it in terms of what use that will be for their property. So that's generally, it's generally either sort of about the measure itself or about the funding that's available. Because most people, when they're in a listed building or a conservation area, will have done a fair bit of research before they've come to us to see what they can do.
Yeah. And one of the bodies that obviously they will talk about are people like Historic Scotland, which I haven't got up there, which have obviously done research on this kind of thing, and they've got research and recommendations of what they were doing. The other interesting factor that came up in the workshop was that actually the installers, technologies and products, we perceive are likely to influence the information that are provided to owners. I know there was comments here earlier on, actually you go to the installers and they offer you a quote and they recommend the technology. Well, as I think, you said, Stephen, as you said, whatever products has been offered and has been quoted will influence the decision that the owner is going to make, and actually not every installer is going to offer every type of product. So who's being asked for the information is going to be, or what information the people that are being asked have used or have or can offer, is very much going to influence where the owners go. And we had an experience of a property owner in the workshop that we did that actually went to an installer that at that point didn't offer slimline double glazing, so he went for a blank application. I believe it was refused anyway, but actually he ended up getting secondary glazing and was very happy with it, but it wasn't recommended to him because that provider didn't offer it. And I suppose the final comment is that planning staff tend not to be consulted initially, and I think we've touched on that, but would you echo that as a...
Yeah, it can be disappointing sometimes, and someone's, they've gone to the bother of speaking to companies, getting quotes and stuff like that, and so the whole kind of like lot of advice that they've had so far has been from the supplier, and the supplier has guided them down this particular route, and their view is almost just completely entrenched. It's kind of, this is what I want, and it doesn't matter what advice I offer them now. It's like they're still going to want to go, and they're going to, sometimes they're kind of like, they've kind of, because they've spoke to the supplier and they've agreed things with the supplier, they're kind of like, well, I can't exactly just kind of go back in that now, and the social factors, I think, that you're kind of like talking about there, and their interactions that they've already had with the company prior to, whereas if they come to us first, then we would have obviously offered them some advice, and then they would have maybe they would have had more of a kind of open mind when they were speaking with the various suppliers, but definitely I would say we tend to not, well, sometimes we are, but a lot of the time we're not.
Again, we've had instances of that in Homeowners Scotland where maybe a particular installer or a customer's been completely entrenched in one particular product or one particular technology, and they're maybe less prepared to listen to other options or other opportunities for getting the property glazed before even speaking to the plan department. So they're just so single-minded and determined about this one product that they feel is fantastic.
And quite often I find as well is that it's like the person has got it into their head that the whole, like the window itself must be replaced. They've got it's like they see a simple kind of like issue. My window's not working, I get a new window, right? Whereas they don't understand that there are many more options available to them. Could be like the inserted the slimline double glazing. Could be just sorting a bit of the timber in their window, or kind of getting it reconditioned, the sash and stuff like that. There are various things that but because they've already got to a point where they're like, no, I want new windows, that's all they want. So you're in that position that you can't talk them back from that. So,
and we're getting some feedback online here. Yeah, true, people seem to have loyalty to a supplier who may not offer an acceptable product. It's an interesting observation. Absolutely right. The supplier is bound to know better than the planet, aren't they? I'm assuming there's a little bit of sarcasm there. And very much reflecting your discussion there, that's the attitude we get coming through from applicants. I suppose, Stephen, you've got a focused area going, a focused project going on in your area. Have you done any kind of outreach work to try and explain the regulations? Does that happen?
Yeah, basically because it's a Townscape Heritage Initiative, there's a Townscape Heritage Initiative officer who will make approaches to people. There's obviously, it's all available on the web, and it's also up to people to come to them to see if they're available for grants, but they have approached a lot of owners and occupiers to try and obviously encourage them, because there's certain areas that we want to target, obviously, for Windows 2. We've got a very big carrot to offer them in terms of they're getting 85% of the costs paid for them. They just have to put in the additional 15%, and that includes for double glazing to be inserted in as well. So it's quite a cost. Obviously, it's given them such a big comeback. But it's still even trying to explain that. We'll still have people trying to want to put in double glazing, UPVC, sorry, double glazing. But it's just trying to get the information out there to them. And we've actually, the way we work with the THI officer is that we'll actually go out to the person as well. We'll have a look at the windows on site with them. We'll send out, they'll send out a letter to them, but we'll send out an individual letter as well, specific to their property, to let them know in terms of, from our side of things, what they would need to do. And that can be simply just putting in some information from the end supplier and the end of what they want to do. So obviously having to maybe put in a planning application or listed building consent as well. But we're really trying to help them through, and it's so that they don't feel they're getting stuck at the planning process stage. And even because to get a grant, obviously they also have to have either permission from us via a letter or the actual planning permissions or consents in place as well. So it's all I think about trying to get that knowledge out there to people, that especially with UPVC, that has an end life as well, and that actually timber windows can be a lot better in the long run, because they're a lot easier to, if they're maintained well and properly, they last longer, but also they're easier to repair as well. They don't necessarily need a full new window set.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. So we've there's an overlap here between the institutions, but opinion leaders is another ISM label. It's actually so there's lots of institutions out there, some of which may or may not be as expert as others, some of which may or may not be consulted. So actually, who is leading the opinion of these owners? And I think the feedback that we got from the workshop in Edinburgh certainly was that actually owners received different recommendations from different sources, echoing technologies held and experiences, but actually neighbours came up as the key information sources is what's to do. What have you done next door? What can I do? And actually echoing the point again that glazing installers are key in terms of providing options. I mean, neighbours, is that where everything?
Yeah, we've certainly had instances in the advice service where a customer's maybe spoken to a neighbour who lives in either a similar property or the property next door, has installed a particular technology or a particular type of glazing, and again that sort of informs their view in terms of what they will do or what they can and can't do as well. So yeah, we do get people who speak to their neighbours and find out what they can do.
Yeah, we've had that especially with the Townscape Heritage Initiative. We've actually had a small grant that was given last year to a property owner. They refurbished their windows. The neighbour above noticed this and went and spoke to them, went to the same supplier, and actually, so it's hopeful that in the long run we will get a trickle effect through this specific area, but in the wider area as well, when people see that, obviously just see the difference that it makes, just appearance-wise as well.
Yeah, okay, appearance is big, yeah. Okay, meanings, we started to touch on this. What does it mean? What does this technology mean, for people? So, I mean, we had a lot of discussion around this, not explicitly around this, but it came out very much, and it's coming out in some of the comments actually online. Actually, slimline glazing, is it or is it not a good thing to do? Is it the right thing to do for your listed property? It's a balance between preserving heritage versus making a property modern, energy efficient. Is it backward looking to try and keep these old bits of glass that aren't very efficient? or is it, it's about protecting the property, keeping it warm, or actually improving the property? I don't know if we've got a perspective in the room on that. What do you hear? Do you hear things like this? How is it being talked? How's this technology being talked about? Equally online, if anyone's got a perspective on this, is it modern, high tech, or is it not a proven technology?
Again, people don't generally tend to come to us in terms of it being a proven technology. They're more looking to replace their what they perceive to be their old tire single glazing with brand new double glazing. Will not that be UPVC or an option that would be more in keeping with the listing of the property or the conservation area that they're in? So they're not necessarily worried about the longevity of the technology. They just want to do something to increase the energy efficiency of the property, and that's very much our experience.
Yeah, I think for us, people are sometimes surprised actually that they can get the technology. They think that the window has to just be replaced. If they're knowledgeable enough to just realise they want a wooden hash and case window replacement, I think we're probably the ones, to be honest, that will actually advise them and say, well, you can actually do the double glazing, because a lot of them do think they can just do the single pane again. They don't really realise that is an option. I don't think, once they hear about it, I think they're more positive about it. I don't know if they go that much into the technology, or maybe that's more the supplier side when they come to that stage as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting from our point of view that you end up being the organisation that's promoting this, I suppose, as an option. And how much work are you doing with installers around? Are you, in terms of this activity, are you working with installers, or?
We've spoken to some just from the point of view of clarifying technologies for ourselves. It's difficult for us because, again, we can't promote any individual company. So although sometimes you really want to, because you know that maybe there's 5 or 6 that do it really well and are really up in the game and really sort of the head with the technology. But again, we find actually, I don't know if it's similar with other authorities, but people actually, if they don't go to the bigger suppliers, they tend to then fall back on local suppliers. And again, sometimes local suppliers aren't up to date with the technology. So in that case, sometimes we've made contact with them just to make them aware of certain factors. But yeah, it can be quite a difference in balance.
That's interesting, and we've got another comment, obviously, from a planner online here saying most of our applications relate to energy improvement.
Yep.
And yes, I agree. Some are surprised that we'll suggest double glazing. So it's again, the background of this research was actually, is this stuff getting promoted out, or is the customer journey getting easier? It's great that actually it's being suggested. I suppose it does suggest that there is still that knowledge gap in there for the owners in terms of options and where they're getting that information from. So I've kind of covered that. I suppose the final thing, which is something that we've already spoken about, is in terms of the priority in government funding. There is government funding out there and loans, but it's not big and it's not as important as insulation and fitting new boilers. And there's another comment here relating to that priority in government funding. Is online here, glazing improvements are more important in older buildings, as often, for example, tenements. There's a lot of wall areas taken up by large, tall windows. So again, windows become relatively more important for the older properties, and in a situation where everybody's talking about boilers and not talking about glazing, then, or walls and not about glazing, then it gets kind of marginalised down. So lots of interesting social factors about what it means to have this technology, how important this technology is, and who's doing the talking about the technology that are showing that they're influencing the decision, and actually almost to some extent reinforcing the uncertainty and confusion, or not giving people a clear answer because the information is not clear out there. So moving quickly on to 5 minutes left on the webinar. Goodness me, right. Individual factors. Okay, we'll look at the individual factors fairly quickly. Well, the knowledge and skills are something that we've talked about quite a lot, knowledge and skills of the owners. So the awareness of the options and the planning policies is typically low. I think I'll get some nods around the room on that. And interestingly, for owners, this is a one-off exercise. So they do it once typically. They'll tell neighbours, but actually it's not information that they're going to use again. So they'll go through a process of learning about this, but then not use it again unless they're a larger property owner. And of course, relating to the knowledge is based on our search, few local authorities have clear, simple planning guidance on this issue. So there is a perception of a gap there in terms of upskilling and increasing knowledge. The benefits and the costs of doing this. Actually, there's a benefit if you retain your heritage frame, put slim profile double glazing, but there is a cost because you're removing heritage glass. So there's a cost to the individual there, and there might be some tensions around that. Some owners prefer the look of slimline double glazing, so that's a benefit to them in terms of as opposed to getting secondary glazing installed. Certainly in terms of getting standard double glazing, but that wouldn't be very unlikely to be an option in a listed property. Interestingly, and this is possibly in relation to conservation areas more than listed buildings, there's a perception of inconsistency of enforcement of glazing installations, in that if there's a conservation area where you're not in theory allowed to use UPVC, actually it gets seen to be there and nothing happens about it. There's a few nods around the room. Who's that kind of?
Well, yeah, I mean it is. I mean, I could go through any one of our conservation areas. Particularly, I mean, I live in Coatbridge. There's a conservation area there, and it's particularly bad. You can go along a street, but you know, it's you go down the road of enforcement. You know, it's like, I mean, particularly with the you know, the financial cuts and stuff like that. It's like, you know, you could have someone doing a full-time job just going around people's houses that have changed their glazing. Probably, I would say. So it is true. There are a lot of examples where you could enforce, but you probably don't.
Yeah, and there's a comment online saying there are enforcement issues even in listed buildings with examples of different properties being treated differently in particular areas. So that's good. I suppose I'm going to rattle through this because we're running very close to time. Obviously, there's another benefit to larger property owners, social housing owners that have got old properties in meeting energy efficiency standards. So it's another way for them to do it. Emotions is the final individual factor, something maybe overlooked. How do people feel about this kind of process? Well, actually, I think owners want to feel good about their properties. It was very clear in the workshop that we did before that when this owner had gone through a process, in his case, of getting secondary glazing installed, he felt great about it. Felt great about making saving, having a comfortable home, protecting the heritage and environment, and making savings to his energy bills and so on. I think, and it was something to show off. It was a good bit of work. It was a job well done. So I think that's an important issue. You know, something that can make people feel good about their homes. So that's a fairly quick run through some of the individual social and material factors that are influencing this process. Okay, and I think it's unpicked a few things, and I want to just pick out some of the key ones here in front of a nice old listed block. The key factors, I suppose, for us are the rules and regulations. Okay, it's not always clear to owners, but on the other hand, it's not possible to be definitive. I think it's there, yep, some nods around the room. Not possible to be definitive on this. So it's a key issue, but there must be something about, you know, improving clarity there. The opinion leaders are really important. There isn't that one impartial expert body. The first information source is clearly hugely important to that owner. Who do they speak to first? This loyalty to a particular supplier is crucial. So if we can get the information around in a different way, then maybe that can have an impact. And there's a lot of different stakeholders with different perceptions of whether or not it's the right thing to do, which is linking to meanings. There's the limited funding, so potentially lower importance for agencies. It's not it's very well accepted, but not a universally accepted or supported product. And is it about preserving, or is it about improving your property? There's a balance there. Networks. There really aren't any established routes to share information and practice around this thing. There isn't. People are talking to neighbours, people are talking to suppliers, but they're not joining together to share this knowledge. It feels like there's a real gap there, and there's a potential opportunity to share experiences around this. And in terms of skills, the owner's knowledge, which is crucial about what they want to do, is typically low, and that needs to be upskilled, and that links into networks and meetings, and it all links together. So just as we wind this up, I will go to the final, and these are some suggested solutions that we've come up with, and again, please feel free to feed in on perceptions on these online. So the first one addresses that big problem about the planning guidance. Is actually, would it be possible to give some specific guidance from each local authority to give more clarity to owners? What are your thoughts on that? Is there something that happens in cases of other planning issues? Could it happen? Should it happen?
Yeah, I mean, we've actually tried to do that in the new conservation area management plans, especially in those areas because of the designation. Obviously, we've tried to be very specific with windows and actually lists in the back when they would require permissions or consents and when they would likely not. So we are trying to do that. Obviously, it's got to be expanded beyond that out with conservation areas as well. That is something that we're looking at the moment.
Okay, great. Any perspective on yours? Is there?
I know there has been discussion on renewing our current supplementary guidance, but it hasn't sort of like moved forward any. I would suspect that, I mean, obviously we're currently going through the call for sites process with our new local plan, a new development plan, and it's probably something that will be addressed as the plan is addressed as well. We will need to update our supplementary planning guidance, particularly with regards to conservation areas and various details. I mean, we've still got supplementary guidance documents that are in draft form that haven't progressed, but it probably is something that we would look at in the future, I would think.
And there's a comment online again about saying good to be more specific, positive on what can be done rather than what can't. And how does that? I'm not an expert on planning regulations. Does it tend to be what can't be done rather than what can be done?
I think this time round we've tried to just list if they're basically putting a list together that just shows on what they're doing. So they're kind of going through in their head just what they're doing rather than saying you can't do something. It's really just what they're doing and then what permissions or consents may be required for that, rather than saying that they can't do something. And we always encourage them to come and speak to us anyway as well about it.
Yeah, when we're speaking to householders about the measures themselves or the funds that are available, again, we're always saying, look, have a chat with your planning department. They'll be able to give you the best steer in terms of what you can do at your property. And again, it's more about what you can do rather than what you can't do.
Great, okay. Right, second one is specific advice and recommendations from an independent expert body. Now, I know there are bodies out there like Home Energy Scotland, like Historic Scotland, that talk about these things, but I think just looking at this, it feels like there needs to be a kind of renewed focus on this and what's possible. I don't know any perspectives on that. Who could that be? Does that make sense?
We have in the past signposted to the Glass and Glazing Federation, because again, they can give advice in terms of like the technologies themselves. We've also signposted to Historic Scotland and also signposted to planning departments as well to get the best steer for the customer.
A planning department's the best place to go, not for technology assessments, I'm guessing, but for...
Not for technology, no. For advice, I mean, we're quite lucky in that our conservation officer has a lot of experience in window types and just from her history. So we've got quite a lot of technical advice in-house, but yeah, we have to go out with, and we're really just there to advise on what would actually be required, but we can't really go into the technical specifications. That's something that we need to basically get the owners to go to companies and then come to us. We can look at the technical specifications once they come in, but we can't really put those down because, as I say, it can be varying window type, window size, building, etc. So there's too many variables to put that in a guidance for us to be able to offer to people.
Yeah, okay. Comment here that there's a comment online suggesting that some of these agencies aren't necessarily pro slim section double glazing, so the prominent ones that we've been talking about. So interesting to see who that person can be. So promotion of best practice, findings and impacts, which kind of links to the specific advice and recommendations. There needs to be some of this networking and sharing, I think, about what can happen with these things and what the drawbacks are and what the benefits are. Networking events, publications. I've actually been talking to colleagues in Home Energy Scotland about whether this is something that could happen, something around glazing to get particular people in, and maybe getting them part of the Green Homes Network. Something like that. I mean, I don't know whether that's...
I think it would be a bad idea. It's something that's in place for renewable technologies, and it allows people to go to a householder who's already installed a renewable technology to see what that's like in situ. I think it would be a good idea for glazing because it would give people a sense of what that will actually look like when it's placed in a property, and also whether or not there's been any sort of thermal improvement, comfort improvement, whether or not there's been any financial savings as well as a result of having it installed. I don't think that's actually a bad idea.
Yeah. Okay, and finally, and I know we're slightly over time, so thanks for everybody for sticking with us. More funding options. That's obviously a challenge for government. It's a challenge for local government as well as national government, but I think maybe a bit more promotion might help, and I don't know. Comments on that? I suppose that's...
Certainly where a customer calls into the advice centre and they feel the levels of funding aren't available or aren't there to where they would meet their needs, we certainly feed that back through the customer feedback we've got on our CRM system, and that does get taken back up to Scottish Government at national level. Don't know about locally though.
think it's a challenge for us to promote things, just given the variety and the size of districts, but it's something that I think we would prefer to have some sort of focal point that we could go put people towards, and that would explain all kind of funding options available to them, what they could do, what they couldn't do, but it might have to be more outside government-led nationally rather than locally, because we locally can obviously individualise for a specific area depending on what type of buildings or what the sort of characteristics of the area are, but the actual focal point would probably be better nationally.
Yeah. Okay. Any other? I mean, we've kind of come to the end. Coming to the end now. That's the kind of possible solutions. Any other comments and suggestions, having from online, of course, or from within the room, about given what you've seen, given your experience, about what you would like to see done, or any other comments about how we could kind of make this process smoother for the owners?
I think probably one item is that there's no comeback on companies if they advise people on the wrong window types, especially if it is a listed building or conservation area. They can push down the UPVC route, but if that person doesn't come to the planning department and they actually get them installed, the comeback and enforcement wise would always be the property owner, and so there's no comeback financial or anything for the actual companies. So that's sometimes the trouble we have, and if they were required by law or the likes to actually give out or check the building themselves before giving advice to people, then that would actually probably help us to go down the route. They would understand that they need to put in a specific type of window, which would then lead on to obviously maybe promoting the better technologies as well with the double glazing.
Yeah, well, that sounds a good idea.
Okay. Any other questions? No, any other questions from the room? Anyone else out there got any other suggestions, comments before we wrap up? I think that was certainly been an interesting discussion that we've had today, from my point of view, in terms of echoing some of the findings that we got from the initial workshop, but actually seeing some of the differences in terms of how the planning regulations are maybe promoted or not promoted from some people in different local authorities. It's great that it's out there, it's great that there's technology out there, it's clearly a technology that there's still a little bit of debate about, and that people are getting confused about to some extent. So hopefully we'll be able to push this forward, share it further, and it'll be great to see if there's any more work coming out of it. So thank you all very much for attending today. Thank you all for watching online. I hope you found that interesting. If you want to review any of the webinar again, it will be available on our website in the near future. And if there's any other comments or questions, please do get in touch with me. My details should have been on the invite to the webinar. So thank you very much.